Good evening, I'm Yochanan El Rom. Welcome to Close Up. On tonight's edition, we're going to take a look at that uniquely European Jewish institution, the Shtetl. At the same time, we'll see projects underway designed to help strengthen Jewish identity in those European countries still suffering fallout from the Holocaust. The countryside of Belarus today displays little resemblance to what it was like in the 18th and 19th centuries when hundreds of little villages, or shtetls, dotted the landscape. Jews were often the majority in these communities. Most of the shtetls were completely destroyed and the inhabitants murdered during the Second World War, leaving no trace of the rich Jewish heritage that had once flourished here. Today, 65 years after the Holocaust, Belarusian Jewish leaders are trying to revitalize the spirit of the Jewish shtetl. One of the ways is through art. These teenage girls from 7 Eastern European countries and Israel are taking part in a program which focuses on famous Belarusian Jewish painters, all of whom grew up in a shtetl. It's the 4th International Art Forum, Jewish Shtetls Revival, and the program's founder, artist and award-winning architect Galina Levina, who helps the participants with hands-on tutoring, says she is interested in conveying a sense of what Jewish life was like in pre-war Belarus. The project is supported and underwritten by the European Jewish Fund.
In our project, we are talking about the Jewish art. We are talking about the past, and we are talking about the future of Jewish art, because it's a really very important. We have a huge heritage of Jewish art here in Belarus, and each participants from different countries, Israel, European countries, who visited our project, they bring this talent of being Jews in their own countries.
The budding artists spend a week touring relevant historic and artistic sites and take part in master classes. They saw for themselves the humble beginnings of artists like Marc Chagall, who grew up in the shtetl of Vitebsk, today a vibrant city of 350,000. The Chagall Museum is housed in his boyhood home. It features Chagall family memorabilia and 300 lithographs, but none of his famous paintings. Museum director Ludmila Hemelnitskaya said this is due to a limited budget. She explained that the museum was only opened in 1991 because during the communist period, the Jewish artist was considered a traitor for having immigrated to France. Not far from the Chagall home is another state-run museum located in the former communist headquarters. It features the paintings of Yudel Pen, who was Chagall's mentor. Pen, however, never achieved the fame of his protege. Nonetheless, many of these young artists said they preferred the work of Pen over Chagall. Our guide, Yiddish-speaking Arkady Shulman, editor of the Russian-language Jewish magazine Mishpacha, told us that the Jewish population of Vitebsk, which numbered nearly 50,000 at the turn of the 20th century, was left decimated by the Holocaust and decades of communist rule. As the girls toured the old Jewish quarter, many made sketches and photographs for future reference. This is the former Chabad synagogue, which was home to a thriving Hasidic community. It lies in ruins today because there are no funds to refurbish the building. Creativity took on a different form for the youngsters at the Hattin Memorial, situated on the site of the former shtetl. It was here that art and history came together. In 1943, German SS troops forced the 1,085 residents into a barn and set the building on fire, and then leveled the village. Today, Hattin stands as a symbol for the 186 Belarusian shtetls, which were destroyed and never rebuilt. The memorial was designed by architect Leonid Levin, who is president of the Belarusian Jewish community and father of Art Forum director Galina Levina. The site made a strong impression on the young participants. Israeli Tair Kamener said she believes living in Israel has given her a better understanding of the Holocaust than her European counterparts on the trip.
In school, we learn about it all the time in history, and when we have the day of the year when we have a ceremony in school.
They don't
No.
teach about the Holocaust in public school.
It's not Jewish school. It's a gymnasium in center of Minsk, and there are not teaching Jewish some subject.
No, in our school is teaching only Moldavian history, and it is very bad, I think, because in our town, the half of our town is Jewish people.
The group also visited Mir, a shtetl that did survive the Holocaust, but without its Jews. The Mir yeshiva staff and students escaped certain death before the war by relocating to Shanghai and later to Israel. The center of town, including the famous Mir Yeshiva building, recently enjoyed a state-funded facelift. Today, the government of Belarus, in need of foreign currency, appears ready to promote tourism and regards the Jewish sites as an attraction worthy of preservation. But for now, tourism to the former Soviet Republic is virtually non-existent. Nevertheless, Jewish Shtetl's revival director, Galina Levina, is enthusiastically promoting Jewish projects and has many new ideas on the drawing board.
You know, I don't like word manager. So I'm not the manager, and I don't want to be the manager, and I don't want to be the director. It's a part of my life, and I'm really, as an architect, as a daughter of my father, I would like to share my knowledge in research of Jewish architecture, Jewish monuments. I am ready to share with youth and to involve our Belarusian Jewish artists in this project.
One such project involves investigating the lives of 4 famous Belarusian Jews who subsequently became leaders in Israel. President Chaim Weizmann, who came from the shtetl of Motul. President Zalman Shazar, who grew up in the shtetl of Stolevsky. President Shimon Peres, who was born in the Viznieva shtetl. And former Prime Minister Menachem Begin, who came from the Belarusian shtetl of Beresta, known today as Brisk or Brest.
We try to show our children that it doesn't matter from which places you are, the world open for you.
Joining me now in the studio is Gabriela Lichko, historian and lecturer whose knowledge of Eastern Europe is encyclopedic, to say the least. Welcome, Gabriela. Let's just briefly define, what is a shtetl?
The shtetl, as we heard, it's a small town with a huge and sometimes just considerable amount of Jewish population, and unfortunately these small towns got to their end after the Second World War. They perished.
Give us a brief overview of what Jewish life was like during the 19th and 20th centuries.
In the 19th and 20th centuries in Eastern Europe, a lot of Jews in that type of communities like Poland, Lithuania were traditional, even the bigger cities, and the Jews living in the shtetls, the small towns. They are also had like traditional professions, and they were learners of the traditions, and also they had small villages. But I think that the real focal point of the life was the shtetl. And basically that was what was perished really finally.
Did, as we mentioned, in many of these communities, the Jewish population was the majority population. Did they get along peacefully with their neighbors, or did they suffer discrimination, anti-Semitism, the terrible pogroms that other places experienced?
It depends, but in Belarusia, pogroms were existed, but not as much as in Ukraine or in Galicia. And for example, that type of big cities like Minsk, Pinsk, and Bobrusk, the Jewish population was more than 50%.
Why did this area produce so many great Jewish personalities, and who were some of these people?
First of all, this one of the reasons that it was a very big concentration of Jews, and these Jews were really, really talented in a lot of fields. If I could mention a couple of them from the most famous of the famous. Just try with the politicians of Israel. Everybody know Shimon Peres, everybody know Menachem Begin, Zalman Shazar, Chaim Weizmann, who was a world famous chemist before, also Yitzhak Shamir. They are all Belarus descent, all of them. And if we are going to the field of the religion, the Jewish religion, as we heard, the Mir Yeshiva, what is the biggest yeshiva today in the world, it was rooted in Belarus. And the religious life was so much diverse that almost you cannot see it in other communities. For example, that was connected so much with the Mitnaged movement, who are oppositions of the Hasidut, and they are producing rabbis like the Chafetz Haim, like the Chazon Ish, or Rabbi Reines, who is one of the forerunner of religious Zionism and having a big yeshiva in Lida, but also the Hasidic movement in the Baltic area. It's having their home in Belarusia, Chabad Lubavitch. Today's biggest Hasidic movement in the world is originate from Belarusia, from Yodi, from a small shtetl close to Vitebsk. Vitebsk Hasidut is coming from there, and also Karlin Stolin, Slonim, and Koidinov.
Now, you mentioned Chabad, but
Yes.
You had said that Chabad sort of grew out of Vitebsk Hasidim, and yet they're rather small today, aren't they?
Vitebsk Hasidim are one of the resurrected Hasiduts. They are very small, even though the Vitebsk Rebbe, Menachem Mendel, was one of the first students of the Maggid of Mezerich, even the Baal Shem Tov, and he led a considerable amount of community to the land of Israel 230, 240 years ago, and Chabad is grown up from Vitebsk. The Alter Rebbe was one of the students, also the Maggid of Mezerich, and also the Rabbi of Vitebsk. And the reason why today we are having so much Menachem Mendels in Chabad, it's because of the first Admor of Vitebsk.
Did the Jews in this area have a freedom to pursue professions that they wanted to, or were they limited?
They basically were traders and were in the commercial fields, and I think that within 150 years ago they could be doctors, they could be lawyers, but the major profession was the commercial.
Belarus was home to 900,000 Jews. 90% were murdered during the Holocaust. Does Belarusian society today, the non-Jewish society, realize what a void has been left, or do they even care?
I hope that there is a serious awakening about this, but we cannot really resurrect the dead. Or maybe we can help to keep what is remained.
And of course, we saw a famous movie not too long ago about the Bielski brothers,
Yeah.
partisans who led a marvelous struggle to save as many Jews as they could from the Nazi killing machine. How did that grow? How did the Bielski brothers grow from that area?
The Bielski brothers were originated from Poland, but their major field, their work field, was in the forests of Belarusia. And it's so interesting that the area, the Baltic area, also Lithuania, is, for example, the home of other partisan groups. For example, the most famous of them is Abba Kovner, who is coming from the Kovno ghetto. And the Bielski partisans are so much interesting because they are also a fighting unit, but also rescuing units of Jews. And in the height of the Bielski partisans in the Belarusian forest, more than 1,000 Jewish people are living with them, and they are having a Beit Knesset, and they are having facilities.
Gabriela Lichko, historian and lecturer, thank you so much for being with us. And I've had the opportunity to hear you lecture, and I would advise anyone who has the chance to hear you come hear one of your lectures to do so. You speak at the Israel Center frequently.
Exactly.
You also give tours. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Well, joining me now is Ari Zuckerman, Secretary General of the European Jewish Fund. Ari, thanks so much for being with us. This program in Belarus, this art form, that is very special to the European Jewish Fund. Why?
Well, I could say that this program is a baby of the European Jewish Fund. We were looking, I would say it was the first board meeting that we held, on innovative ways to attract youngsters to Jewish life. And we were looking for the youngsters that are not coming to the Hanukkah lighting in the synagogues, that are not coming to the prayers in the holidays. And we wanted to attract them. And we saw Galina Levina and her father. They stood up and they said to us, listen, let's do it through art. Let's attract them through art. And this started as a very innovative, as a very new project, and happened to be a very successful one, where children are coming from all around Europe, connecting together and connecting to Judaism through art.
What is the philosophy of, or the goal of the European Jewish Fund?
Well, as you can see in this project, we are different from the big organizations that are active in Europe, like the Sochnut or the JDC. We're mainly trying to attract the unaffiliated Jews. The ones that are not connected to the communities, to the Jewish life. We tried very much to create Jewish pride, which we see as a very essential element for them to want to be connected. And we're trying also to create leadership, which I would say is a very challenging task, especially in the small communities in Europe.
How are the communities in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, different from American Jewish communities?
Well, first of all, the distinction between Eastern communities and Western communities is, of course, a right so. And the distinction is so big that it would be easier for me to answer what is the similarity. But I would start, first of all, with the mere existence of these communities, which is not going without say, as with the American ones. To be a Jew in the United States, it's something that I would say in a very short sentence doesn't burden you with any kind of burden, blame, consequences. To be a Jew in Europe today, you bear the consequences of whatever happens in the Middle East. You bear the consequences of the past of Europe, and especially where you are in small communities, you bear the consequences of very live and threatening anti-Semitism that still threatens the mere life of some of the communities.
Well, let's take a look at one such program that you're operating in Europe. The European Jewish Fund plays a major role in the project called Paideia. Talented young Jews from all over Europe gather in Stockholm, Sweden for a year-long course that prepares them to take leadership roles.
They are young, talented and successful and come from all over Europe. These are students at Paideia, the European Institute for Jewish Studies in Stockholm, Sweden. Each one was carefully screened and selected as a Jewish activist and a potential future leader.
The whole thrust of Paideia is to empower people. We want to empower them on two levels. These are like two legs of Paideia. One is with the knowledge that will make them confident enough to really be the real actors, the real creators. And the other hand is activism. We want to make sure that it doesn't stay only with knowledge, but that people really become empowered to bring about their own dreams of how Jewish culture can look in their own societies.
Every summer, Paideia holds a program called Project Incubator, in which these entrepreneurs for Jewish culture, many of whom are graduates of the Institute's one-year academic course, are provided with the tools to push their current project forward and transform their ideas into reality.
Paideia absolutely provides an umbrella and an ability to articulate and then execute these ideas and interests that the Jewish young community has, and it gives them the format to take it from idea and thinking to actual execution and articulation.
One participant was Venice resident Shaul Bassi, who is working on a proposal to revitalize Jewish life in the tourist-oriented canal town, which was once home to a large, vibrant Jewish community.
What happens today is that there are a vital but small Jewish community and thousands of visitors, Jewish visitors. And so what we're trying to do is to create an occasion for them to meet and to interact, and so that the visitor can share the experience of living in Venice, which is a great experience, and the local Jews can learn more about the larger Jewish world, and perhaps also make of Venice again a center of Jewish learning as it was for centuries in the past.
Katie and Giles from London have mounted a musical performance called Soviet Zion. It's about Stalin's attempt in the 1920s to establish a socialist Yiddish homeland in the Jewish autonomous region of Birobidzhan.
I think the leaders have helped us understand how to reach out to the Jewish community, how important networking with the Jewish community is, and again, not to alienate non-Jewish audiences either from the project, and to realise that it has a commercial aspect as well.
And I suppose another thing that they've really tried to instill with everyone here is that we're not just individual people with hobbies. They've really tried to convince us that we're actually pioneers and leaders and activists, and that's certainly not something that we would have described ourselves as Jewish activists before this project. But they've really inspired us.
The sponsors of Paideia believe that it's imperative to help strengthen European Jewish communities still traumatized by the Holocaust and lingering anti-Semitism.
It's a project of educating, of studying during 1 year young Jewish guys and ladies how to be political leaders today, how to survive under all possible circumstances, how to learn our tradition, our customs, which I think is the best protection for survival. It was our customs and our tradition was the biggest security during thousands of years. And I think it will be for future as well.
We are trying very much to build this issue of Jewish pride, creating pride among these youngsters, making them being proud of their tradition, of their community, of their past, but the most challenging thing, of their present.
Today, through programs such as Project Incubator, European Jewry is regaining its historic role as a source of academic excellence, culture, and Jewish learning.
When we think of Jewish creativity and where the centers of Jewish learning are, we look towards Israel and we look towards America, and someone once told me that Europe is the place we fly over to get to those areas, and I'd never really understood about the creativity of young Jewish life in Europe. And I think what I'm finding here is there's these little flames and pockets of sparks kind of Jewish creativity, and seeing them all come together at Paideia and meet each other and the connections that are coming from that, it really does feel like something new and exciting is happening in Europe.
Ari, let me ask you, how do you measure the success of a program like the one in Stockholm?
Well, first of all, you could go to the results and prizes that this program got, but that is not how I measure it. I measure it to see how the graduates came back to the communities and reflect and affect the lives of the youngsters, of the community as a whole. I think this is the main challenge of Paideia. They equip these youngsters with, I think, all the necessary tools for a full year, bringing them also to Israel, but then the challenge is coming back to the community and affecting the community.
What role does Aliyah, making immigrating to Israel, play in the scope of the European Jewish Fund?
Well, Aliyah is for sure one of the goals, but I would say it's a more remote goals, and that is the difference between the European Jewish Fund and the other institutions. We are touching, as I said before, unaffiliated Jews. We're touching Jews that are far from the issue of Aliyah. What we're trying to do is to save them as Jews, to bring them back to Judaism, to bring them back to the community, to create pride by being Jewish. Only after that you could start speaking with them about Aliyah.
All right, Ari Zuckerman, Secretary General of the European Jewish Fund, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for this edition of Close Up. I do want to thank the Jewish community of Belarus and especially Galina Levina for the invaluable help and assistance they provided. I also want to thank my guest, Jewish historian and lecturer Gabriela Lichko, and Ari Zuckerman, Secretary General of the European Jewish Fund, and my colleague Dennis Zinn, whose talent and creativity are unsurpassed. If you have any comments regarding tonight's program, please write to us, ibatvnews@gmail.com. That's ibatvnews@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. Have a good evening, and shalom from Jerusalem.